All right. Hello, anybody who happens to be listening. My name is Jay Brown. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. I want to welcome you. I want to thank you. I appreciate you lending me your ear. This is a very big day for the podcast. I've been hyping it up for weeks, I know, but Douglas Rushkoff is here today. And it's a big deal for me, not just because it's Douglas Rushkoff, but in many ways because of the way in which this podcast came about was a magical occurrence for me. But before I tell you about that, before I tell you the story of how this podcast came about, I think it needs to be prefaced with the fact that I'm a huge fan of Douglas Rushkoff. In particular, he's got these 3 books. One of them's called Program or Be Programmed. Another one's called Present Shock. And then a more recent one's called Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. And if you haven't read these books, I highly recommend them. Especially those of you who send me emails and are asking me for advice on like how to go about doing your own thing. People are listening to this podcast and feeling inspired by it, and they're like, I want to do my own projects and creative things and maybe start my own podcast, and they're sending me emails. And I want to say that I think the best thing that you can do is read those 3 books. I mean, this podcast is largely coming out of inspiration in me that I think is coming from Douglas Rushkoff writings. And so he really has a viewpoint and some knowledge about the internet and the economy that is very empowering. Sometimes it's kind of scary, honestly, because it's some hard truth sometimes. But I know that for myself, being able to understand what's really going on better has helped me figure out how to make my own choices. So all of this is to say that I'm a huge fan of Douglas Rushkoff, right? So how did I end up getting him to come on this podcast? That is the question. First, the story begins in my Friday night basics class, which has been mentioned on this podcast many times because I'm often recording these intros right after I teach that class. In fact, that's what's happening right now. It's Friday night. I just taught my class, and now it's quiet in here, and I'm by myself. So very often when I'm talking to you in these intros, it's right after my Friday night class. And some weeks, maybe a month or so back, I guess, I'm in my Friday night class, and it's a small class that night. I think it's maybe 5 or 6 people. One of the people in that class deserves a big fat shout out. Her name is Marianne Bateman. Without Marianne, this definitely would not have happened. So Marianne's in class, and she's a great woman. We have a very lovely rapport together. It's very fun. We laugh a lot, and I often invite people in my class to speak very freely. Like I have a stock line that says, if you have questions or comments or wisecrack jokes, you're allowed to interrupt me at any time. So Marianne is one of the rare students who takes me up on that from time to time, which I love. And so one Friday night, a month or so ago, I'm in class, and it's a small class, and I know everybody. So I'm kind of spouting off a little bit. Sometimes I do that. And I'm talking about what I've been thinking about that day. And I had just read something of Douglas Rushkoff's, and I'm quoting him in class. And Marianne says out loud, Douglas Rushkoff? You mean Rushy? I know that guy. He goes to my yoga class upstate. I said, really? You know Douglas Rushkoff? Oh, yeah, he's a great guy. He's super fun. He comes every week. And I say, totally in jest, just in the moment, well, if you can get Douglas Rushkoff to come on my podcast, I will certify you in the teacher training today. You don't even have to do anything because Marianne's in my teacher training program right now. So I was like, I'll pass you through the teacher training. You don't even have to do any of the work if you can get Douglas Rushkoff to come on my podcast. I'm totally joking, and she laughs, and she says, oh, I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to get him to come on. And in my mind, I thought, oh, yeah, right. So 2 days later, I get a call from Marianne, and she says, I just talked to Rushy. He says he'll do it. Just give him an email. And I said, what you mean, you just talked to Douglas Rushkoff? He said he'd come on the podcast? Yeah, he said he would do it. Just send him an email. I was like, well, what's his email address? Well, just go to his website. It's on there. I'm like, oh, okay. So I go to his website, and sure enough, Douglas Rushkoff's email address is on his website. And so I have to write an email to him now. So needless to say, I spent, I think, way too much time writing this email. It's like I wanted him to know that I really appreciated his work. I wanted him to know that it's had an impact on me. I wanted him to, know that if he came on the podcast, it would be like worth his time, that we'd have a good conversation, And I didn't want to sound like a fanboy at the same time, right? So I spend this time crafting this email to him, and I send it off. And then sure enough, I'm totally insecure about it after I send it off, which is so funny. It's like a little schoolboy, like worrying, oh, I shouldn't have put those links on there. Oh, why'd I do that now? I blew my chance. So anyways, after I get over that, I kind of relaxed. And then sure enough, as soon as I relax, an email lands in my inbox from Douglas Rushkoff. So I open the email, and it's just a couple sentences, but I only really, really remember the first sentence, which said, are you the Jason from Bava on East 6th Street? And boom, I suddenly have this flash, like a Proustian moment where I remember this guy coming up to me after a class back in 2004 and giving me a copy of his book. I met the guy years ago. I already knew him or something. But the reason why I didn't remember that I knew him is that the book that he gave me, and we talk about this in the podcast, the book that he gave me, it wasn't about the internet or economy. It was about Judaism. And we talk about this book he wrote about Judaism. So in my mind, that guy who gave me that book, it wasn't Douglas Rushkoff that I know now, So I couldn't believe it. What? This guy who I've just been sort of been in my brain and sort of really been looking up to is he used to go to my class often. It turns out, as we learn and you'll hear, I was one of his first yoga teachers apparently. So in any case, he agrees to not only record a podcast with me, but he comes to Brooklyn and he takes my class. And then he comes back to my place around the corner and goes into my basement with me and records this podcast. So it was awesome. I mean, it was great. And the fact that we practiced together first was really perfect for me. Because anytime I can have a practice with someone, I feel like I can get into a mutual space with them. That's the whole deal. So I was more relaxed than I think I would have been. And if it had been a phone call, I think I would have been much rougher for me. But to just sit with him and hang out with him, he's a super cool guy. And he's super smart and really wise on some stuff. So that's it. That's how it happened. You should also check out his podcast. It's called Team Human. He also has a new book. Not a book. He has a graphic novel out called Aleister and Adolf. It's about Aleister Crowley and Adolf Hitler. I have not had a chance to read it yet, but my producer Josh has, and he was raving about it. So check out his stuff. There'll be links. And I'm just super psyched. I've got more to say about it, but I've said enough already. So we're going to get to the talk with Douglas Rushkoff. But first, before we do, let me just take care of a little bit of business. I'm doing some traveling around, and some of you guys have been emailing me about those gigs, and I would very much like to see you if you want to come out. I am going to be in Tarrytown, New York, February 26th at Riverstone Yoga. I am going to be in Japan, March 18th through the 27th, I believe it is. I'm going to be in, where am I going to be? West Hartford, Connecticut, April 30th. I am also going to be at the Feathered Pipe Ranch in Montana, June 17th. That's shaping up. And you know what else? If you were listening last week, Brenda Feuerstein was on, and it turns out she lives near the Feathered Pipe Ranch. And there's a chance that she might come. Oh, that would be so cool if Brenda Feuerstein could come hang out at the Feathered Pipe Ranch with me. I know you might be listening right now, Brenda. I'm not trying to pressure you or anything, but that would be super cool. Not just for me, but like for everybody else who might also come. So all of those gigs and my blog, which I should mention actually, because I'm releasing my blog this month on the same day that I'm releasing this podcast. And I rarely ever do that. I never really like to release a blog and a podcast on the same day. I usually take that week off of the podcast to put out the blog. But this week, I put out the blog with this podcast because they kind of go together for me. The blog is really me trying to process this conversation I had with him. I also think if you're somebody who reads my blog regularly and also listens to this podcast, it's kind of an interesting thing for me how it's a blog version and a podcast version of the same ideas that I was looking to offer. So it's interesting to maybe juxtapose them and see how those two different things would express it or not. In any case, you can check out the blog, those dates, and the archive of this podcast, and my online yoga video stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, that's that, and I think that we are good to go, my friends. Let's do it. Let's go hang out in my basement with Douglas Rushkoff. Say again?
Douglas.
Okay.
Douglas Rushkoff.
Douglas. Wow. I got to tell you, this is a very kind of surreal moment for me because I spend like a lot of time in this basement by myself late at night, like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. This is like where I come to do like all my work after they go to sleep. Mm-hmm. And I've been coming, we've lived here for maybe, 6 years or something. And a lot of the time I spend down here, I've contemplated ideas that are in my head as a result of reading your books. So I've like had conversations with you in my head by myself in this basement for years. And now you're actually here. You're in my basement, the actual guy, not the books. So I've just...
The guy's not as good as the books.
No, not okay. Even... Not true. I really appreciate that you made this trip out here to give me this time, man. Thanks.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thanks for having me. I mean, you've been in my head, too. I got back into yoga practice maybe, 4 years ago. So I've been going 3 times a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I would always get taken back to that basement in Bava, and what we used to do in there. And because, you were like my original taste test.
Really? That was like
yoga.
Your first yoga?
Yeah, well, I did it once at Princeton and PE, in the 70s or 80s, whenever I was there. They had a guy from Kundalini. So it was all breath of fire and Satnama.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of yoga. I mean, God bless. It was that guy with the cereal, I mean, his whole group.
Yogi Bhajan.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. And so I did that, but it wasn't, it was before yoga mats. It was when you brought a towel,
Mm-hmm.
But then Bava, when I got to the East Village in Bava, that was my first this is yoga.
Wow.
Cool.
Well, that's the other thing that I've been really trying to get my mind around. I've been trying to figure out how it's possible that I could have forgotten that we had met. Because
context was so different.
I think so, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And, as soon as you emailed me and you said, are you the Jason from Bava on 6th Street? I had like a Proustian moment or something, you know, or like I ate the cookie or something, and suddenly I had this memory of you coming up to me and giving me a copy of your book. And I don't have any other memories of like us talking at any other times or even kind of like working with you in class, but I have this one memory of you giving me a copy of your book. But that book was called Nothing Sacred. It's about Judaism. Yep. So my first question is, what motivated you to give me that book? Was that because of something I had said, or was that more just like a gesture of appreciation because you enjoyed my class?
I think you had said something. I think you had talked about a Thanksgiving argument with your father about Judaism, maybe? Mm-hmm. And you were like contemplating whether he was right or not, and there's something about the role of tradition or fidelity. It had to do with fidelity. Mm-hmm. And the whole point of that book, which I had written, you know, during that same year, was that fidelity is a living thing, not a dead thing. So fidelity is not your allegiance to tradition. Real fidelity, at least as in Judaism, is your willingness to wrestle in an ongoing way, in a new way, with all of the old stuff.
I remember I read most of it. I don't think I finished it, but I was really intrigued. What I got, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, was that you were kind of talking about Judaism as sort of like, you could think of it as sort of an open source database of wisdom rather than like the closed thing that it came to be, which is why I don't identify with it.
Right. Yeah, it was the original title of the book was The Case for Open Source Judaism. The idea that it's there's a source code there, but you're supposed to interpret it and add to it, and you know,
Talmud was just questions.
Yeah.
Right?
And it was hypertext. It had all this, you know, Talmud was the original text and then all these texts written around it. Torah's there and there's all this midrash written around it. So that you're supposed to keep doing that. It's a process. And I kept arguing that Judaism is not a religion because it's not this thing set in stone. Judaism is the anti-religion. Judaism is the process by which we get over religion. You know, and that's why its experienced is so corrosive, because you go to a place and there's all these people believing this stuff, and Jews move in and they're like, why the hell are you praying to that thing over there? You know, what is that? You know, we don't know. We don't really believe. Jews don't really believe necessarily. I mean, I get in trouble for saying this, but Jews don't believe in anything. They don't have to. It's like the bar mitzvah is not a statement of belief. Bar mitzvah is a demonstration of literacy. Okay,
it was for me. I in fact did all of the Torah portions at my bar mitzvah, not just my Haftorah, because I was like this kiss-ass kid who could memorize real well. And I remember someone coming up and saying, "Oh, it's so nice to see a young man taking pride in his Jewish education." But I didn't learn anything. Like I remember reading translations at a certain point when I was 16 to all these prayers I knew by heart, and like having this epiphany: I don't believe in this.
Well, it's great. I mean, but then that's the perfect metaphor for your whole development, though, isn't it? It's the kid who could do all 5 parshas and sing it and chant it, and you're motivated to do it because everybody's going to go, holy shit, look at this guy. He did the whole dang thing. But the substance wasn't there, you know? Right. So you flipped it. But you flipped it. You know, it takes so long for us to figure this kind of stuff out.
I think so. Well, okay, so that kind of explains to me some why I forgot that we had met, because I don't know you as a guy who wrote about Judaism.
Yeah, that was an off-track thing anyway.
That's what I want to ask you about.
I was just so pissed off because they were so screwing up Judaism at that moment that I was just like, dudes, stop trying to market this thing. Stop trying to reach the teens and all. You've got the best source material. Just let it be. Just let it, you know, let go of it. And you share it. It's all good. You know, but they couldn't. They're trying. There's so much effort. You know?
Well, that was my question, is that I know you now down in this basement in my head from Program or Be Programmed, Present Shock, and Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. Like, you are like my digital literacy internet economy guru. Like, you're like my oracle. And so I never associated you as the guy who wrote about Judaism. And you just said that was kind of like a little bit of excursion. You had already written, you know, Coercion and other books that were about internet and open source. But then you wrote this book about Judaism. So what was that about? Like, was there something that happened that, like, were you raised in a really Jewish household?
Not so much. I mean, it was really more, I had the profound, almost psychedelic open source insight when I got involved with digital technology, and I saw, oh my gosh, I was part of that late 80s, early 90s Timothy Leary rave culture, cyberdelic, cyberpunk era. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh wow, we're wiring up the global brain. This is our sort of, I saw it in a very spiritual way, that this is us explicitly wiring ourselves up so that we can let go and just be part of this one thing that we're all in anyway. So I looked at the net as this kind of test run, this almost training wheels for a psychically connected civilization. And that it would, open up, and I write about this in all my stuff, it would let us do peer-to-peer trading and connect with other people and work from home on our underwear on our own time and get off the industrial age treadmill and all that. And I had the insight with the internet, and I started to apply it to all these other things. So I applied it to business to tell them, oh, look, this is how really you should be running your businesses, or applied it to kids' culture and education. I wrote this book called Playing the Future, saying let the kids go and let them experience the extension of their neural activity through media and games. And, what's the difference between a kid playing a video game versus you or I watching a TV show? And one is this active adventure. And so I would apply it to all these things. And Judaism was one of the things I wanted to apply it to, because I saw in Judaism, it was like, oh, they were dealing with the big media shift of their era. They were dealing with the invention of text. What was the invention of text going to do? Oh, no, now we're going to have contracts. Now we're going to have history. Now we're going to have laws. How are we going to deal with a text-based society? And that's really what Torah was looking at, was the transition to text and ownership and all that stuff. And I felt like I could apply some of those insights to the digital age, but I could also apply the insights of the digital age to that. To the motivation was just seeing the ridiculousness, the all this counting of Jews and all this hand-wringing about, oh, you're a lapsed Jew, you're not going to synagogue, as if that means you're not Jewish. It's like, shit, if you're teaching a yoga class to people, that's Judaism. That's it. If you're making music, if you're working for the ACLU, that's the expression of Judaism. How dare you say that these people are lapsed? They are the most advanced version of Jew.
I see. So it was like your attempt to give to your Jewish brethren,
yeah,
your insights. Well, I appreciate that a lot. I mean, I certainly had that experience. And when you articulated what Judaism was earlier, when you said it's the non-religion to undo the religion, that's what I think yoga is. Mm-hmm. That's what I would translate yoga as.
But look how many people, the minute they get involved, try to turn it back into a religion. They can't help it. We so long for that, that sense of knowing, and they're the yoga gods, that I can pray to them or something, or my yoga teacher, I can pray to him. And it's hard.
Well, all right. So I want to go a little bit back to what you just said also in terms of this early formative time for you and the rave culture, because getting ready to talk to you, I took a look at Siberia, which was the first thing you wrote. And I had other flashes, because when I left, I grew up in Los Angeles and moved to New York to go to school. If I'm not mistaken, you grew up in New York and moved to Los Angeles to go to
get a master's, yeah.
All right. So I left Los Angeles in 1990. And when I left, I had all my friends. I went back 6 months later for Christmas break. All of my friends were raving. Hardcore. Thursday night to Sunday, rave to after hours club to after, and they took me, and I was blown away. I just remember it was pretty clandestine. You had to call the number and go to the drop place and say the right word to get in. And it was a huge warehouse, 5,000 people. I'm Xing out of my head. I got a vitamin smart drink and a nitrous oxide balloon. And I remember thinking, wow, this is amazing and incredible, but also kind of freaked out, this is really dystopian, all these people drugged out in the thumping techno music. And you were writing about that. You stumbled into that too? Is that what happened?
Yeah, or stumbled into the very beginnings of it. My friends from college, I went to Princeton undergrad, and my most Grateful Dead-y psychedelic friends had ended up moving to California to become part of the beginnings of the computer movement.
Okay.
They had jobs at Apple and Sun, and I wanted to know, why are my theater buddies all of a sudden doing computer programming? So I went out there as a New Yorker. I was back in New York by then, in the late 80s. I went out to San Francisco and spent, a year there just seeing what was happening. And that's when people from England came over, the first members of the rave movement and kind of launched it in San Francisco. So I got to watch it kind of happen. And for me, it was I realized it was ridiculous on a lot of levels. Have 2,000 kids reaching up into the sky, thinking they're going to bring down the UFO.
It didn't pan out that well for a lot of my friends, honestly.
But it was also, for me, it was the shape of something to come. And it was the internet. It was hypertext culture. It was designer reality. It was moving into a world where, and I still believe this is true, moving into a world where, the things we imagine we can create. And unless you bring that vision and a sense of responsibility to that power, then you end up creating Amazon and Uber and this nightmare rather than the world that we could build.
Well, that's the other thing I was thinking too when I looked at Siberia is I have these memories. My parents sent me to computer camp in the 80s. So I learned like a little bit of programming. It was like basic and logic or whatever. I had an Apple IIe. And I remember the first time I came across the internet or something like the internet was a bulletin board system. My friend was really into like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it was like you had those word games that you would play. And I remember somebody giving me, it was like a list of numbers and a process by which I could call this number and put in this number and make phone calls that my parents couldn't track. And then I was told to only use the number once and then cross it off each time. And I'd look back, that was like totally illegal shit that I was doing.
Phone
like,
freaking,
Yeah. And that was like the early times, right? Like that was what, it was like, I don't know, like a wild west of
we were just
technology.
Exploring the network. So all the wires were there, and all the wires were put there really to either broadcast television to us or let us talk for a lot of money point to some old relative. And now with computers, we turn that network into this other thing.
Right.
We plugged in a $1 zillion phone industry into a $1 zillion computer industry, and all of a sudden, poof, the world changed. And I got excited by that, first almost religiously and spiritually in terms of what does this mean for the, human evolution? What's going on a sort of a Gaia level here as we wire ourselves together. Then after that was the book that turned out to be really the most important, was this one called Media Virus. Which is where we're in today. I mean, Donald Trump is the ultimate media virus. And that's, I guess, my claim to fame is I'm the guy that came up with viral media as a thing. And I can't be blamed for it, but I can be credited with it at least.
Coined the phrase.
Yeah. But what I was trying to argue was that the viruses themselves are less important than the cultural agendas that they unleash. That if we get infected with a media virus, it's because we have a cultural immune response to what's in that virus. So Trump is blank. He's kind of empty as a thing. He's barely a vessel. It's our cultural immune response to the memes that he's generating or he's reflecting.
And I guess where I'm going now is that, back at that time, earlier times, there wasn't the kind of like platform monopolies now. Like I remember just before I met you, I guess, like in 2002, like some young startup friends were creating this holistic hub, and I was the yoga guy. I was supposed to go on the internet. I was using Alta Vista search engine. There wasn't Google yet. And I was supposed to find all the yoga sites. I think I found maybe 60 of them. And when I met you and you gave me that book, Nothing Scared.
Sacred, yeah.
Nothing Sacred, excuse me. Google and Facebook and Amazon had they captured it as much as they have now? Or did you just see it coming before it actually came?
I didn't think it would come. Yeah. I didn't think it was possible because the net that I was raised on was non-commercial. Back in the day when you were doing your phone freaking and I was up on the net, you weren't allowed to do commercial activity online. You had to sign an agreement saying I'm going to use this for research purposes only. So those of us in the early days didn't think we thought government was the enemy. We were upset because they were arresting the little hackers who would do stuff like you were doing. They did Operation Sun Devil, where they took 3 or 4 really good 14-year-old hackers and were throwing them in jail because they had explored. They changed the temperature in a shopping mall, or broke into AT&T. They just wanted to see. They were exploring. They were playing like any kid breaking into stuff. So we thought government was the enemy and really worked hard to keep them out. say, government, get away. And what we didn't realize was when you repress government, corporations grow. It's like getting rid of fungus. You need fungus to keep bacteria in check. So then corporations grew and they took over the whole net really in 2 or 3 years.
And I've heard you talk about that some. When do you think it shifted from being this open thing that you couldn't sell stuff on to like, when was it okay to start selling stuff on it?
Well, it wasn't even the selling stuff on it. It was selling the net itself. It was seeing the net less as even a place to do commerce than as a place to justify stock valuations on Wall Street. And that moment really was the day that Netscape went public. It was this a browser, the Netscape browser, which now is Firefox and stuff. But it was Mozilla. It was made by a nonprofit originally. It was part of a university effort. When Netscape went public, it was the same day that Jerry Garcia died. And I always thought this is the moment that the net leaves behind the 60s values and goes pure Gordon Gekko. Now it's how do we sell out? And it was almost the same moment, the Clintons and the boomers selling out and becoming this other thing. So that was it. Either that or when AOL bought Time Warner. That was a weird moment because I pegged it. I got asked to write the New York Times op-ed when that happened. And I wrote this piece and I said, this is crazy. This is bad that Steve Case, the head of AOL, is cashing in his chips. This means AOL has peaked. Now they're buying something real with their inflated stock, and the dot-com boom is going to bust imminently. And the New York Times said, we can't publish that. This is crazy. Every business person in our business department says, you're off the wall. And this is you. So I published it in The Guardian instead. And of course it turned out to be true, that was the moment. That once you see these big digital companies buying real companies with their stock, it's because their stock is about to tank. That they need to they're going to the window at the casino and cashing in the chips.
And that marked the end of the free internet for you.
Yeah, and the dot-com boom and bust, and that, okay, this is all about the financialization of this stuff and not building anything for people.
Wow. And that certainly has played out, hasn't it?
Yeah. And it's sad. It's sad on a certain level because there was such potential. And now, we use digital technologies to take people's jobs away, and we don't really replace them with anything better. And we've got these giant companies that are really here not to promote the value exchange between people, but to just extract value from people. It's more like vacuum cleaners going into different verticals.
For me, I feel that happened most like with Facebook. Like I remember when Facebook came out, it seemed like this great thing where I was connecting to all my old friends from high school. At some point, I just became like this marketing platform, and them trying to like get money out of me, and that. Now I hate it.
Yeah, it's weird. I remember like back in the early internet days, like your parents and relatives, everybody was on AOL. And they thought AOL was the net. Only they were really stuck in this little walled garden of AOL. And then there was this moment when AOL like plugged itself into the real internet, and then all the AOL people showed up in Usenet and IRC, and it was like, dudes, no, there's no porn in this Usenet chat. Go somewhere else. I'm not going to tell you that. It was just, we were overwhelmed. But I never imagined it would go back. And now with Facebook, it's almost as if they've built this private internet on top of the internet, and people are going to it and trying to live their whole internet lives in there. And now if you're not, even magazines are publishing themselves within Facebook rather than in their own sites, because if you don't get social references and links from Facebook, then it doesn't count, and Facebook's going to favor your links if they're coming from inside Facebook rather than your own thing. So they're also trying to – it's interesting. There's like 3 or 4 companies, and each one wants to own the whole net. It's like a poker game, and they're like the 5 guys at the table. Jeff Bezos at Amazon. You got Sergey and Larry at Google. You got Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. You've got these 4 or 5 companies, and they're going to sit there until one of them owns the whole thing. They all have their voice Siri thing. They've all got their social strategy. They've all got their streaming media strategy. They've all got search. They've all got maps. It's like, who's going to own the whole enchilada? And we'll see.
I know. Wow. Well, I mean, see, to me, that Program or Be Programmed was the book for me that was like a lot about just coming into some literacy about the situation. Like, okay, these are softwares, and that sometimes there was this myth. I know in the yoga world, there's like this myth of exposure, of like all these people putting out full-length yoga content on YouTube with this idea that it's going to magically launch them into some kind of yoga stardom career or something. And I remember first kind of realizing, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to play out so good. But
not for most of them. I mean, it could play out for someone.
That's right. Some people did. Some people did have YouTube channels.
Yeah, it's the Taylor Swift thing. It's called the power law dynamic. You know, once you try to do it on there, you'll get one or two people will make $1 zillion, but everyone else is going to make nothing. And you have to think about, is that the yoga universe I want to live in, where there's 2 yoga stars and everybody else is starving? It's like, what happened to the distributed real world? I want to walk down the street and do my practice with people.
I know. And that's, for yoga teachers, I think a hard thing is so much of what we did was about that, getting into a room with other people and doing breathing and moving exercises like we did earlier today. But then as times go on, in order to, like, if you want to be a quote-unquote professional yoga teacher, you have had to become more digitally literate. Like, you have to. Like, as much as I don't like Facebook, if I post a testimonial and a link, I make sales.
Right.
It's just a reality of it. So yoga teachers have had to, like, become digital marketers, and there's all these courses for them and trainings for them how to be, like, smarter about it. But sometimes the advice they're getting is not good advice.
No, because I mean, I was a big open net kind of guy, and I used to spend a lot of time making sure pretty much everything I wrote would be on my website. So I had, by the time it peaked a couple years ago, I had maybe 600 articles on there, 150, 200 talks on video, the full manuscript of 4 or 5 of my books. I mean, just massive amounts of stuff. And I realized on a certain level, not that people shouldn't have my stuff for free. It's not that. But that making things that available and that accessible devalues it. Mm-hmm. It's not that I want to put up walls, but it's like, if you want to read my book and you want it for free, at least tell me your name.
Yeah. Seems reasonable.
Something. I want it to be an exchange of some kind, rather than and it's just not fair, because if I put everything up online, then it's. I mean, but besides who uses it, I mean, it ends up getting used in courses, and a lot of other people end up making money off your stuff.
Right.
Besides you.
That's where I was going in my head, that for content providers, I hate the words, but okay, let's just say content providers, with the way things are now, you have to try to protect your stuff a little bit. Otherwise, everybody else makes money off it except you.
And the people in the world mistake the video of you doing a class for the class.
Yeah.
And they're 2 totally different things. So it's like, I get it. If let's use like the synagogue example would be, and I got called in for a lot of panels about this, on whether or not it's okay for people to do to have video during a Shabbat service, so that old people now can watch and participate in the Shabbat service through the computer instead of having to somehow get there. And I said,
live streaming Seder?
Yeah, or live streaming Shabbat or davening. And I'm like, it's okay as long as there's not a teenager losing the opportunity to be the person who goes to that old person's house, gets them in the wheelchair, gets them in the van, and brings them, because that's the mitzvah. That's the best thing about having someone who needs you, is that you get to serve, and if we lose that, then we lose it. But, I've looked, if I'm in trouble, I'm in a hotel room and I haven't gotten to do, because I'm on tour and I'm contemplating taking speed or something to make it through the day. If I can use the streaming media and see some, girl on a rock in Hawaii doing a, intermediate practice, that's better than nothing. And I can move around. It's better than me just trying to, push through a down dog in the room. It's good. But it's not class.
No,
it's something else.
I was really resistant to making online video and stuff, but I embraced it, and it's been good. A lot of people have benefited from it, and I do make a lot of connection through that. But I appreciate it. It's something I know you've written that in certain ways the internet is not that great at connecting people. Like so much as it is like letting someone know that you're there, like somebody in the neighborhood finding the yoga center is more of like the real function of it than them really making the personal connection. Although I have to say, like this podcast, which happened largely because of, again, ideas that I got from you, has been really much better at making those kinds of connections.
That's big. I mean, podcast is really, I think it's the killer app of the net, because the podcast is audio. So it's a good, hot medium. It's intimate. It's not video. Look at the difference between a video podcast and an audio podcast. The audio podcast gets in your body. It's vibrating on you. It's and in you. And I mean, you carry it.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.